right, welcome back to another John Pod. In American politics right now, I think there's two very interesting schisms happening on the left as well as on the right. And it's scrambling the entire political spectrum in a way that I think is concerning, but also in a way that I think is really exciting because it's opening up possibilities for what American politics can look like in the future. And we might be seeing, a glimpse of what the end of this cultural gridlock that the United States has been in for, about 20 years, 15 years. We're starting to see what the next chapter of political life in America might look like or sound like. So let's start with the left. Not sure if you've been following the New York City mayoral. How do you say that? They're electing a new mayor in New York City. And what's interesting about this election is Andrew Cuomo is kind of back in the spotlight. He was canceled to a degree for his inappropriate behavior towards women. But this wasn't like a Harvey Weinstein level of cancellation, but it was definitely, there were some cringy and upsetting and concerning accusations. And he was very apologetic at the time, but since then he sort of changed his tune and he's now seeing himself more as a victim of cancel culture. And I don't want to dig into that, but that's just sort of backstory of him. But he's one of the leading options for mayor. But Zohran Mamdani is a new candidate. He's a totally new face, and he has had what feels like an entirely organic kind of meteoric rise in the political scene in this race. And I think in recent polls, he's been seen as kind of the lead candidate. And I've also heard that, some of the ranked choice voting dynamics that they use in New York City is assisting him. But I got to say, his campaign videos are very effective. And he is a democratic socialist. And so what we're seeing on the left right now is this interesting tension between this kind of Bernie democratic socialism and the centrist, just left of center Democrats who have typically been the ones that are voted into power. Biden, I think, is a great example of that. Although it's fair to say that he ended up getting kind of pushed to the left by his party during his presidency. I think this election, it's anyone's guess where it's going to land. But if Zohran were to win, this would be a sign that AOC seems like the most likely face of the future of the Democratic Party. AOC actually endorsed Zohran very recently, and that was a big deal. But if you go online and you scroll through X like I do every day, I'm getting the sense that a lot of people are excited to vote for Mamdani, and I don't know. I mean, if he wins, this is just a big deal. This suggests that we're going to have a very socialist summer. And if we kind of zoom out and we think about the broader context that we're in, this makes sense. The left has been sort of pulled in two directions. The far left leftists, the Hassans of the world, the AOCs, the Bernies, a little bit more of an idealism-driven kind of philosophy, a socialist philosophy to how money, wealth, labor should be treated by the government, handled. And essentially it's a vision of a large centralized government that has a strong say in labor laws and wages and what a fair distribution of wealth is and what is the best way to reduce inequality, which is a growing issue in the United States. And so it would make sense that after having a billionaire president who, gave positions to some of the wealthiest people in the country, including the wealthiest person in the world, Elon Musk, but more to talk about him in a moment. It would make sense that after having a president who is all about gold and is all about money and has really spent his whole career constructing an image of being a wealthy, savvy billionaire, it would make sense that we would see a correction and maybe even an overcorrection in the other direction, a far left people's president who relies on small donations, isn't endorsed by billionaires, and who is about addressing some of these big concerns we have. If you think about AI and how AI is going to affect employment, the job market right now for like college graduates is incredibly difficult. So I can see there being a ton of fuel in this world right now for a political candidate with a socialist tilted or a full-on socialist platform. Now, critics of Zoran and AOC and Bernie, the critics will say there's just fiscally no way that these ideas, these policies, New York run grocery stores, freezing rent, there's just no way that these ideas are financially literate. There's just no math to back them. How can we pay for these things? And while this is happening, it clashes really strong with this intense discussion that we'll talk about in a minute of the national deficit. And so when we are in a country that has a potentially existential amount of debt hanging over its head, a socialist platform that would, theoretically greatly increase the amount the government is spending on entitlements and services, healthcare for its citizens. I mean, there's reasons to believe that would just make this debt it would blow this debt up even more, make it even more of a problem. And ultimately, it would cause a collapse and maybe even an existential death spiral, which I've heard people say, for the country. So in one sense, I can see how the sentiment is leaning towards socialism. But in another sense, there is a lot of voiced concern around the deficit, and a lot of Trump supporters, including people like on the All In podcast, they've been advocating for an era of austerity, an era of financial fiscal responsibility, and seeing the government pull back how much it spends on its citizens and giving the market the opportunity to fill in those gaps and just take steps towards having a balanced federal budget so that this debt isn't increasing to an extent that would just, overwhelm the system and eventually cause, the downfall of our financial system and our government, yada, yada, yada. There's just no way of, knowing with certainty who exactly is right here. But what's interesting is if Zoran Mamdani wins, this would suggest that a message like his will resonate, and someone like AOC has a really good shot at running for the presidency. And AOC is somebody who, I think AOC is so polarizing to begin with. I'm skeptical of her ability to broaden her support and to change her image enough to win over a majority of Americans, or honestly, even a majority of the Democratic Party. But if Zoran is a success, that could be a force that broadens her support. Bernie had, I think, a little bit more of an ability to appeal to an everyday American, whereas I think AOC really appeals to progressives, and she just doesn't have, I think, that natural ability to appeal to more of the blue-collar, Midwest, everyday Americans, the way Bernie did, at least, the 2016 Bernie. So that's what's happening on the far left. And then, the left of center folks are relatively the same. That's where I think a candidate like Pete Buttigieg is sort of surfacing. And Pete Buttigieg is, I think, a great example or a good face of the more moderate Democratic platform right now. He's somebody who I think could probably speak more competently to issues like the federal deficit and social services and how the government can go about paying for those and what is an appropriate or inappropriate level of cutting into those programs. And so, part of me thinks that someone like Pete Buttigieg he's more likely to be the face of the party, but there's so much time. And I think the thing that's going against Buttigieg right now is we're also seeing a real backlash against the Bidens. No matter what Buttigieg does, he will always sort of have some egg on his face for being tied to the Biden administration, which is as unpopular as ever, especially in light of some reporting and the recent book that came out just a few weeks ago, Original Sin, the Jake Tapper book. Original Sin, I think, really is showing how much rot and I think just like static inertia exists in the Democratic establishment. And it is really becoming a party that, while Trump continues to be controversial and upsets a lot of people with some of his actions, like what's happening now with ICE and deportations, even amongst all of that controversy, Democrats continue to poll very poorly. And I think that is just because the Biden administration left such a terrible taste in our mouths, as we kind of are hearing all of these stories about how mentally unfit and physically unfit for the job Biden was, just because of his old age, and how much that was hidden from the public, and how much the public was sort of manipulated and deceived to believe that he was up for the job, and how crazy it is now in hindsight to realize that they decided with very little input to run him again for office. There is just not a lot of love for Biden right now. He was the face of a moderate Democrat. Buttigieg, as talented as he is tied to that brand. And so it'll be interesting to see if he can, kind of shake off some of that negative association. There's a lot of time before the next election cycle, so a ton can happen. And so, yeah, we've got this kind of AOC faction, this Pete Buttigieg faction. We'll see if this mayor race in New York City gives us some insight as to where the public is leading. And what we're seeing with Zoran is this is what left-wing populism potentially looks like. I think in our lifetime, Bernie Sanders was the best example of a leftist form of populism. And a lot of people felt like he was robbed and sort of forced out and not given a fair shot at being the nominee. But that continues. We continue to see, democratic socialist ideas and messaging work the best as a platform for left-wing populism. And populism, I think, right now is the winning formula for politics. But again, a lot will change. But Trump definitely made populism the default mode of politics. No matter what the financial viability is of Zoran's ideas and his policies that he is advocating for, it's undeniable that his campaign, his media, whoever is doing his videos, his camera presence, just how he communicates through the media he appears in, it's undeniable that it is working. And we are seeing kind of a rise from zero to hero, similar to Obama, in Zoran right now. And so this is worth paying attention to. Now, if we shift gears and we look over to the right of the political spectrum, there's actually even more cracks starting to appear. What was so interesting about Donald Trump going into the 2024 election was how big his coalition was. He had the, Christian nationalist, the far right MAGA faction of his party, but he also had these libertarian, techno Silicon Valley type of people supporting him, the All In podcast. And there's a lot of light between culturally and policy-wise between those two factions. But the fact that Donald Trump was able to pull people like Elon in, as well as, hang on to Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller and hold all of that together under one big tent. I mean, you got to give Trump credit for being able to bring together that coalition. RFK Jr. and Maha kind of pulled in as well. So there was a very broad appeal that Trump had leading into the election. And it was unclear how long that coalition was going to hold. I kind of did sense that they were going to be unified for longer than they have been, but we've already seen the cracks start to come out. The most obvious one, Elon Musk, the way news unfolds, that feels like it was months ago. It's actually just a few weeks ago. Elon and Trump had their big feud. They've kind of made up, but Elon's no longer in the administration, at least not the way he was. And it's unclear exactly what Doge has accomplished, but that fraction of the party is not as aligned with Trump as they were previously now that Elon's out. But even more so, Trump just had a falling out with Tucker Carlson. And I saw Tucker Carlson totally grill Ted Cruz in an interview about going to war and defending Israel in Iran. So the issue of Israel, Iran, and this, yet another war in the Middle East, this is causing some major cracks in Trump's political coalition. And honestly, right now, like if midterms were held tomorrow, Trump would be in really bad shape because there's a lot of people online who are very disappointed. Dave Smith recently renounced Trump. They're disappointed in Trump for supporting Israel. They're disappointed in him for supporting, the spark of another war in the Middle East. And this is a really interesting divide. The Trump administration has historically been very pro-Israel. And, based on Trump's, family and just the way he's talked about Israel in the past, it seems like he is going to be more aligned with kind of the Bush era foreign policy types, the Lindsey Grahams of the party when it comes to Israel. And he's going to take their guidance and advice on how to deal with this Iran situation. And that is costing him a huge portion of his support, more than I think he probably realizes. But as people start to peel off and are very outspoken, like Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, this tension is only going to grow more. So if midterms were held tomorrow, if midterms were this year, Trump would be in really hot water because his coalition is really cut into pieces. It's interesting because it's just Trump can't hold together the messaging that was and the promises that he made during the campaign. A big appeal or a big selling line about why Trump was such a good first president was no new wars were started. There were no new wars in the Middle East. Trump was a peaceful president. He didn't believe in starting wars. He's not a militarily focused president, but that is starting to that messaging is ringing more and more hollow as we see just the inevitability of the U.S. being very involved in this Iran-Israel war, and we'll just have to see how this plays out. It's a big deal that Tucker Carlson is not playing nicely with conservatives the way one might expect. And so among all of this kind of scrambling, there's this really, really interesting, we're kind of looking at the political spectrum in a really interesting, fresh way, because now there are all these unlikely and unexpected alignments between different kinds of people, different kinds of influencers and political factions, depending on the issue. A lot of the isolationist conservatives find themselves very aligned with liberals because they don't want to see another war. But then there are also liberals who are very aligned with more of the kind of neoconservative Bush era conservatives. And they see the inevitability of going to war with Iran and how Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. And so we do have to support Israel. And that's not even the only issue that Trump has that's kind of caused some division. His big, beautiful bill, which has yet to get passed in the Senate, I suspect it will, but it's currently being worked on so that it can make it through the Senate. It increases government spending significantly, which increases the deficit, as we kind of talked about. And there is a tremendous amount of pressure on Trump from that more libertarian Silicon Valley faction of his coalition that Elon Musk represented to do whatever it takes to wipe out the deficit. And so that was, I think, the kind of source of that really ended up seeming like ultimately what was the source of the falling out between Trump and Elon. Elon, said that this bill was just, stuffed with disgusting pork or something like that. But yeah, the BBB is not a unifying bill as much as I think conservatives would like it to be. I mean, just kind of double clicking on the situation in Iran, this is kind of like throwing gasoline on the fire when it comes to what's already been going on in Gaza and just the US's tight allyship with Israel. And so there's part of me that thinks, look, when it comes to foreign policy, once somebody is elected as president, and they talk to the generals, and they kind of get a clearer sense of the United States positioning in the global order. I think it's very unlikely for somebody to be in that position and to rock the boat so much as to alienate and push away Israel. Obama certainly did that to his own, I think, frustration when he tried to negotiate the Iran nuclear deals with John Kerry at the time in his administration. But Netanyahu hated Obama for that, and that tense relationship did not give Obama very many benefits. And so if you watch that interview with Ted Cruz, he says, look, the United States is allies with Israel, and we enjoy a lot of benefits from that relationship. So we shouldn't change it. My gut leads me to think that status quo will continue. And so what we will see is a continued amount of growing frustration with those folks who voted for Trump because they thought he wasn't going to start new wars, and they don't support what's going on. They don't support Israel's actions in Gaza, and they wanted to see more of an America first, isolationist, focused approach. And we haven't even talked about immigration, but I don't think it's just crazy how much is going on right now. And so to some degree, the world is not in a stable place, and the United States is certainly not in a stable place. And that is concerning. But I'm not sure things are as bad as maybe our doom scrolling leads us to believe. And I mean, this is all just sort of hopeful, wishful thinking. We could be on a path to nuclear annihilation with this whole Iran stuff. But my hope is that what we're seeing is such a scrambling of the Overton window of ideas and the political spectrum, and sort of these traditionally entrenched sides of what the left believes and what the right believes in American politics, that I think now there's this really exciting opportunity for new voices to start coming out, and for there to be a total reconsideration on both sides of the aisle of what issues are the best for that party, and what is that stance on that issue. And so I think we're going to see a totally cooking up of what is the Democratic Party. Is it Biden's party? Is it Buttigieg's party? Or is it AOC's populist party? What is the Conservative Party? Is it Trump and his support of Israel? Or is there going to be a new populist candidate who is even more isolationist than Trump, or is more committed to that isolationist messaging? I also do think there's a possibility that Trump is very aware of how his support feels about him. And so I think if enough people peel off, there's a good chance that Trump will change his tune, and I think try and thread the needle with where he stands with Israel, similar to how we've seen him do with Russia. Will that be an effective way of leadership? I don't know. We'll have to see. But if I were Donald Trump right now, I would be concerned, because you're kind of in an impossible situation to hold on to your base. And so, while there was all this talk about, Trump running for a third term, and I think a lot of that was sort of trolling, I think we're going to hear less and less of this, because as these years go on, we're only 6 months into just year one of Trump 2.0. There has already been a lot of support and political capital lost just because of the variety of issues that are going on. I mean, immigration, these ICE deportations, the economy, these tariffs, the uncertainty they've brought into the economy. Yeah, we'll see. Trump could certainly turn it around, but at least right now, I think there's this really cool opportunity for the left to speed run some of their ideas. And I mean, honestly, if Zoran wins, it's a great opportunity for socialists to put their ideas to practice. What does socialist policy look like once it's elected and empowered to make change? And is that effective over time? Does that improve the lives of the people who live under that government? So we'll see how this plays out in New York. There's part of me that's very, very curious to see if Zoran can win, just to see that populist campaign, actually break through. and to see if his approach to governance works. Because if it does, again, this is going to be great for AOC. If it doesn't work, people are going to think twice about supporting someone like her, or we're going to see her move to the center towards Buttigieg. So TBD. But overall, there's just this exciting opportunity, because if we just assume that norms are held and Donald Trump graciously steps down when his time comes at the end of his second term, we're going to be in this really unique situation where there will be a brand new face on the left, or a new presidential candidate on the left, as well as a new face on the right. And what I've found so exciting about seeing Mamdani rise just in public awareness, at least on X, is there's just so much excitement and new invested interest in politics when a new fresh voice and face enters the scene. And so if we're seeing that happen on both sides of the political aisle in this next presidential election, there could be an opportunity to really just like break this, this doomsday, sort of fatigued, burnt out attitude and vibe that has existed in politics. For there to be two people debating that are under the age of 70, running for office, it's almost hard to remember a time when that was the norm. I don't know about you, but I'm really in the mood for a reset. That's sort of my assessment of the political landscape right now. Obviously, hoping for the most peaceful resolution to what's going on in the Middle East right now. But I'm also anxiously anticipating further escalation and even an escalation of U.S. involvement in that situation. So just kind of going to have to be apprehensively waiting to see how that plays out. But ultimately, in the long run, I think we're looking at a lot of new terrain where both the left and the right will have to totally reconsider what their platforms are. And we could see just like a real, yet another interesting reconfiguration of what coalitions the left and the right have. And I think this could be healthy. I think it could be a good thing for politics. So time will tell. Thanks for listening. Until next time.